Welcome back to another My Hero Academia anime vs. manga video, breaking down Season 7, Episode 14, titled Together With Shoji, sharing the same title as Chapter 371. The episode begins with a flashback to Shoji's past, as we see that he is heavily discriminated against for being a heteromorph, calling him a freak, and that he has dirty blood. It's then stated by someone that no matter how much society progresses, will never accept you and your kind. The flashback ends with Shoji walking towards a river and an angry Spinner in the present day. Now, Shoji's flashback and the episode itself deals with the topic of discrimination against minority groups. The discrimination of heteromorphs in the world of My Hero Academia has been a plotline that was brewing for so long in the background. We've seen time and time again throughout the series that there has been some tension between heteromorphs and those who look relatively normal in hero society. We all know of Shoto's act of discrimination against the chief of police at the end of the Stain arc when he called the chief of police a mutt in reference to the chief of police looking like a dog. This pretty much spawning in the Todoroki is a racist meme, and on a grander scale, we know that there were hate groups formed in the past that not only went against those who manifested quirks, but specifically to those who were heteromorphs, such as the Creature Rejection Clan, which back during that period in time, when a meta ability physically changed the appearance of a person, they were called mutants. Over the years, the term mutants was changed to the more politically correct term heteromorphs. This kind of discrimination within My Hero Academia's world has been a problem for over a century at this point. Continuing on, in front of the central hospital, we go back in time to after everyone heard of the news of Dabi being defeated. Spinner and the army of heteromorphs are making their way to take back Kurogiri from the hospital. Kurogiri being the closest thing to a masterpiece out of all of the high-ends within the bioengineered No Move series. All for One figured out that he was being held in the central hospital and sent Spinner to lead a small army made up of the PLF remnants and ordinary citizens who agreed with their ideology, totaling a force of about 15,000 heteromorphs. Here, the anime adds in an extra shot showing more heteromorphs, and in the background of the heteromorphs running together, we can see the mask of two Creature Rejection Clan members being held up by sticks. In an anime-only scene, the heteromorphs throw Molotovs at the police force and try to force their way through to the hospital. It's revealed that the only people stopping them were the remaining heroes and the remaining members of the police squad, making up a total of 200 people. President Mike, in an attempt to clear out some of the heteromorphs, almost dies but is saved by Anima. Amidst the chaos, Anima and Shoji got split up, and in an anime-only scene, we see the police shooting a sort of taser gun at the heteromorphs, electrocuting them and knocking them out. Knowing that they won't be getting any backup, Gori tells the others to push them back with their taser shields. Rocklock, being swarmed by heteromorphs, doesn't understand how this thrown together mob is so organized. The heteromorphs all shout at him saying that they aren't a mob. People like him are always like this, and no one who looks human can understand. This all absolutely shocks and frightens Rocklock to his core. And I'm not gonna lie, I do find it funny that this is being said to the one black guy in the series, but this is meant to be an allegory for racism, especially since one of the heteromorphs does say that they aren't a mob, which in the manga they are actually referred to by Rocklock as rioters. After this, the heteromorphs overrun Anima. He tells them to stop, and the heteromorph can tell that Kota was raised in the city and calls him a traitor to his kind. The PLF member tells the heteromorphs that today is the day of liberation. He says that they know things like quirk counseling and quirk education are shams because of the forms they bear. He brings up the 6-6 incident. That is, of course, a reference to Order 66 from Star Wars, and the Great Jedi Purge being a reference to the Great Jedi Purge in Star Wars, both incidents of course having to do with the Jedi in the Star Wars universe being hunted down and killed, meaning that in the My Hero Academia universe, this is exactly what happened to heteromorphs during these historical events. The man continues and says that the history of the paranormal is one of persecution and oppression for those who didn't fit the mold, as we see the heteromorphs of of the past being held down, beaten, and executed. One of the men who participated in one massacre of heteromorphs gave his reason for doing so as simply, "They creep me out." In the present day, the world feels remorse for those actions by having heteromorphs in certain positions of power, with characters like the Chief of Police, Gori, and Principal Nezu, but in reality, they're just pretending to be remorseful, as in dense cities, the populace is raised in a diverse melting pot where through the wonders of education, discrimination is a thing of the past. But taking a look beyond the cities, and people will still say, "They creep me out." I absolutely love Horikoshi's writing here, because this is something that we see in our modern day all around the world, where discrimination is a lot more prevalent in less diverse areas. It's why a lot of people do tend to feel that certain aspects of discrimination doesn't exist, while a lot of others tend to feel that those aspects are more alive than ever. It's why the heteromorph calls out Kota, feeling that he was privileged and a traitor to all of the other heteromorphs, all because he was raised in a big city and didn't feel the same way as them. Also, before anyone says something dumb in the comments, I am a minority myself, so there's that. Continuing on, he says that even the strongest light can't illuminate every corner of society. That light never shone upon those of them here today, for they must find their own light in this world. The man asks the heroes, "Have you ever thought, if only I didn't look like this? You people aren't our heroes. Instead, Spinner will be the one who will lead them to the center of society." Here, we find out that the PLF member is using Spinner and the League to not only liberate themselves, but to further push Redestro's revolution, thus manipulating the heteromorphs as a whole. We see that Spinner, after All For One gave him extra quirks, his mind keeps going blank. This, of course, being a reference to how when All For One gives people more than one quirk, they essentially become brain dead, similar to that of the Nomu, where they are unable to speak. Shoji hits Spinner with Octo Blow, preventing Spinner from attacking some officers. The heteromorphs see this and hold Shoji down and beat him. Shoji, trying to get up, asks the heteromorphs what's any of their problems has to do with attacking the hospital right now, and the heteromorphs all become silent. He says that the first thing the heroes did at Jakku was make sure that the patients and staff were safe, but they don't have a plan. We see a young bandaged up Shoji standing by the river. He asks if they have a plan as he uses his arms to clear off the heteromorphs. With his mask torn off, he says if they don't have a plan, he won't forgive them. The heteromorphs, shocked, notices the scars on Shoji's face, but despite seeing them, they all look to Spinner to guide them on what to do next. Spinner, overwhelmed by the quirks and those who seek guidance from him, blanks out and says, "Who cares?" This takes the heteromorphs by surprise, as the one who is supposed to lead them doesn't seem to care about their cause. The PLF member manipulates the heteromorphs in thinking that Spinner meant to say history is written in blood, so such things are unavoidable. He then thinks to himself that Spinner and Shoji are making this way too hard and tells the heteromorphs to press forward. As we see in the anime only shot, a bunch of heteromorphs are charging towards the hospital. Shoji tells Spinner that he is going to set them back 30 years. Spinner tells Shoji to shut up as red scales begin popping out all over his body. This is because not only did All For One give Spinner a body bulk quirk, but a second quirk on top of that called Scale Mail, which by its name alone gives Spinner hardened scales all over his body as armor. Spinner thinks back to a conversation he had with Shigaraki before the events of the My Villain Academia arc, where we see that him and Shigaraki have shared interests with each other as they both played LOL, which in the manga this is specified to be League of Legends. And you know what? Shigaraki and Spinner being League players just makes sense. A fully armored Spinner charges at Shoji while telling the others to keep going as he hits Shoji with his giant sword. The PLF member tells the heteromorphs to observe Spinner, displaying how the oppressed must find the courage to strike back, and that the blood spilled today will lead to rights for future heteromorphs. Anima begins to undergo a quirk evolution as he thinks about Shoji's backstory in a flashback. Shoji, talking to some of Class 1A, unmasks himself and tells them that his parents didn't have arms like this. The people in his village were terrible. They all came out in force for a blood cleansing whenever he touched someone, ganging up on him and beating him up. He says that Kota, Tokoyami, and and the rest of them who grew up in cities might only know about this from textbooks, but there are still places that will leave scars on children like the ones he has on his face. Mina says that the world would be better without people like that, and Shoji tells her that's good, but disparity still remains. Mineta freaks out because at one point he did call Shoji an octopus, but he never meant it in a way where he was calling Shoji creepy. Mineta here being a clear example of someone who grew up in the city where discrimination isn't that wide of an issue, as there is no shortage of diversity when it comes to quirks and people. Shoji completely understands, as he never took any offense to Mineta's comment, as it's only natural that his arms would make people think of an octopus, and it's the reason why he went with the name Tentacle. Besides, he is completely aware of the tabloid stuff, like the widespread heroes who look like villains rankings. The heroes who look like villains is a clear example of the world unintentionally discriminating against heroes who are heteromorphs, because Shoji hints that the list comprises of mostly heroes who are heteromorphs, as Gang Orca was in third place when it came to that list, all the way back in chapter 110. In the wider My Hero Academia universe, we even see how society 5 years before the start of My Hero Academia, heteromorphs that look scary are automatically assumed to be villains by the public. Even something as simple as doors for entering into public places aren't accessible to certain kinds of heteromorphs, because doors are built with the regular human shape in mind. This even applies to living spaces as well. So even though the world has progressed a long way in accepting heteromorphs, there are little things like tabloid lists and everyday life that hinder heteromorphs in big ways that someone who probably grew up in a big city wouldn't really take note of that. And Shoji does tell them that he doesn't want them to treat the topic as taboo because of him, but his scars and heteromorph form do give people ideas about him. It's why he wears a mask, since he doesn't want people to think that he's trying to get revenge for what happened to him. Tokoyami tells Shoji that this takes strength, and Shoji says he'll never forget all of the terrible times he went through, but rather than dwell on the bad memories, he'd rather cling to the single good one he has related to his body. Here we see the reason why Shoji was beaten and scarred up by the villagers was because at the river he witnessed a young girl drowning, and he used his body and quirk to save the girl with his arms. It's why after he gets beat and is bandaged up, he visits the river, showing that he didn't regret his actions. Some of the students embrace Shoji as they want to make more happy memories with him. He states that he knows it'll take more than one generation to tear down a wall that stood in place for over a century, so just as those who came before him have done, he will keep paying it forward. He'll be the coolest hero the world's ever seen to give good memories to generations to come. In the present, we see Anima now has horns coming out of his head as Shoji is being chased down by Spinner. Shoji tells Spinner that he too was persecuted, and that the people who hurt them both weren't justified, but there has to be a better way of going about it. Spinner still doesn't care and wants to destroy everything. Shoji tells Spinner to think about how he's using his rage, because they all have scars that they carry. In an added scene, the heteromorphs all talk amongst each other, slowly realizing the errors of their ways and how two wrongs doesn't make a right. The PLF member mocks Shoji, saying if it were that easy, it would have never came to this, saying that Shoji is just shouting his selfish feelings and their hearts won't be moved by childish thoughts, as society has long since hardened them. Anima swarms the PLF member with a bunch of crows using his newfound ability, as President Mike is witnessing the two young heroes giving it their all. A big thing that this fight covers through Spinner is how one who is a minority can harbor self-hate for the way that they look due to the way they have been treated by others. As soon as Spinner sees Shoji twisting his arms together that also have eyeballs on them, gearing up to hit Spinner with his octospansion, Spinner is the only heteromorph to call Shoji's move gross because of it. Spinner, the heteromorph who isn't comfortable in his own skin because of his quirk, calls a fellow heteromorph gross for what his quirk allows him to do. This topic of self-hate a minority can feel for not only themselves but for other minorities like them is something that doesn't get talked about a lot in the modern day, as as it's clear people who feel this way do need help in feeling comfortable with who they are, instead of spreading this sort of hate onto each other. Before the war, Tentacle asked for him and Anima to be assigned to protect the hospital. Turns out the big woman that Deku saved told him about this call to action for the heteromorphs to go after the hospital. Shoji wouldn't be able to call himself a hero if he just let this call to action play out. President Mike, seeing Shoji in action, says that Tentacle and Anima are stronger than they were as the three Domingos. Kota has a flashback to his mom telling him that one day his horns will grow in and he would be able to beam his thoughts and feelings to animals that are even further away. She mentions how because of the way she looks, she had to put up with some real cruelty over the years, but his dad would get riled up on her behalf and would tell people to not mock her horns. She tells Kota that it's okay to get mad and wants him to grow up to become a man who gets mad when people mock something or someone dear to him. In the present day, Anima attacks the PLF member with Hitchcock birds, and President Mike uses his voice to shatter Spinner's sword, and Shoji hits Spinner with Octospansion. Shoji asks Spinner what will he choose to protect with his scales and giant body, and then he asks the heteromorphs what they are hoping to protect with the bodies that they were blessed with, and he is then reminded of Aoyama, who was exploited by the villains, and tells them to not let the villains exploit their wounds, as next time their children might be the next target. This to me hits so hard because it's so true. There will always be people who are minorities who will see their people suffering and will exploit them by using their rage in a way that solely benefits them and their own cause, which is exactly what we see the PLF and by extension All For One do with the heteromorphs, who really all just wants better treatment by society. It's sad, but this is something that does happen more often than not in the real world. Shoji then remembers after being beaten by the villagers, the little girl he saved came to him crying as it was her fault for drowning that the villagers scarred his face, and he then tells the heteromorphs to not turn into people who just want revenge. Spinner, clinging to the wall, says that his hatred won't go away. If the heroes win, then nothing will ever change. The heteromorphs see this as the call to action. Spinner continues as he states that for the crime of walking out in public, he was sprayed with pesticide. When they hit us, we hit them back. He calls out to all of his brothers to follow him and be heard as he leaps towards the hospital. Shoji looks down at the heteromorphs as they all became fired up after hearing Spinner's call to action. In some added shots, we see that the heteromorphs are overpowering the police force, and Gori states that they can't last much longer, and he takes out his gun and starts firing. The episode ends with Spinner finally breaking through the entrance of the hospital. The anime for this moment does remove the detail of heteromorphs coming through along with Spinner, and Spinner crushing a police officer on the ground with his hand. Now, this episode covers a total of 2.5 chapters, them being chapters 370, 371, and half of chapter 372. This episode was a lot. It had a lot to say about discrimination in a way that I feel was handled very well, and was a lot deeper than just discrimination bad, because we all know that discriminating against other people is bad. Horikoshi did something that I feel a lot of writers nowadays are scared to do, and that's having a minority character holding other minorities accountable for their actions, while also being understanding of the struggles they've gone through, and the heteromorphs are never told that they were wrong to feel the way that they do. They were only told that they were using their anger in the wrong way. I also love that we see so many different angles to this, like not every minority goes through the same thing, as we see with Tokoyami, Shoji, and Kota, as their experiences with discrimination are completely different. How minorities will discriminate against their own. Not once did it feel like the heteromorphs were made to be villains, as it was clear that they were being manipulated by someone who they believed would lead them all to a better life because he looked just like them. They were victims who were fed up with society and just wanted things to be better for them, but were manipulated into using their anger for all of the wrong reasons, to go about justice in the wrong way. As a minority myself, I really love the way Horikoshi told this part of the story, and I can't wait for the next episode. Let me know your thoughts on the episode. Did they stay cooked with the changes. Let me know everything in the comment section below. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to octo-spansion that like button down below, and if you are new to the Kitaroki channel, then be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications on so that you don't miss any My Hero Academia Season 7 breakdowns. With that said, I'll see you all in the next one.